Hey there, I'm Glenn Athy. Welcome to the Your Local Economy Forum series of podcasts and videos. There are 16 episodes which aim to introduce the theory and practice of local economic development. We have two guiding principles for this video series and the way we work, and that is economic development builds prosperous, inclusive communities that are sustainable. And the other guiding principle is it's my mission to help build great economic development organizations. And this video is part of Series 1 of the Foundations of Local and Regional Economic Development. In this episode, we're going to talk about key concepts in economic development. And this is a shorter episode. It's the Redux episode. It's a 10-minute long episode, which is a much shorter version than the full 30-minute episode, which goes into a lot more detail. What we're going to talk about in this video is why local economic development, why is it important? What are the economic theories of economic development that help us understand, what we see in our regional economies and the economic outcomes we see and the prospects for growth? And also, when these theories fall down, we need more theories to help explain change in our local and regional economies. And I'll talk a bit about using theory and evidence, this idea of curiosity, which is about asking the right questions. And then I'll talk about competency briefly at the end. So, local and regional economies, why should we care? Why is it important to consider local and regional economic development? Well, if we look at these maps, the left-hand map shows the annual percentage change in economic output, GVA, that's the nominal value over a 20-year period in local areas in the UK. And as we can see, there are massive disparities in economic growth rates. Similarly, in the right-hand side map, there are massive disparities in the annual rate of jobs growth over a 20-year period too. And if we look at GVA per head in 2022, again, massive disparities from £16,000 GVA per head to £40,000 per head, or £9 million per head if you live in the City of London. And similarly, productivity measured by GVA per hour worked is highly variable by local area. We're quickly going to run through some aspects of economic development theories because they really help us understand the process of economic development and growth, and when things go wrong and why they go wrong. We talk about how theory is developed, and this is going to be very quick. There's a lot more detail in the 30-minute video. So basically, it starts off in the 16th to 18th century with the ideas of physiocracy, which is about land. Agriculture and land development is where all the value is in the economy, and that's where we should focus. And mercantilism is about export maximization and import minimization through strict controls and things like tariffs on imports. Into the 19th century, we developed concepts of economic nationalism, which took tariffs and restrictions further and restricted capital movement further. But also, this is where the idea of a market economy or classical economic theory started to be developed by people like Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations. What is the fundamental message is that the wealth of a nation is determined by its national income. And this was in turn based on the labour of its inhabitants, how it was organised, and the use of capital. So in the 1940s to 60s, and quite an important period, we just the presentation and development of theories a bit more sophisticated. The two-sector surplus model is a theory of development in which surplus labour from traditional agriculture, as it modernises, is transferred to the modern industrial sector. That grows over time. And then the surplus labour absorb. This promotes industrialization and also promotes the industrialization of agriculture. And importantly, there's the Rostov stages of growth model, where our economy is a traditional society. It achieves some preconditions for takeoff, then takeoff a drive to maturity, and then a age of high mass consumption. Into the 1970s, when we saw that despite developing countries improving their GDP, their economic output, poverty, was still widespread, and this idea that there's some aspect of dependence on advanced economies, that developing nations have poorer terms of trade and are relied on for raw materials to feed industrialization in advanced economies, and they're kept there at that level. They're not allowed to industrialize through things like tariffs on imports and controls. And so the concern with poverty led to development of theories about the redistribution of wealth and basic needs. Into the 1980s, we see the rise in neoclassical economics, which believes in the primacy of markets and emphasizes economic liberalization, privatization, deregulation, globalization, free trade, monetarism, austerity, and the role of the private sector. And in the 1990s onwards was a reaction to the neoliberalist economic theory that was put into practice in international development policy and funding because it just didn't work. Studies showed that neoliberal or so-called Washington consensus policies only contributed to 15% of growth in developing countries. So other theories were developed to try and understand why this happened, and this endogenous growth theory holds that investment in human capital, innovation, and knowledge are significant contributors to economic growth, and it focuses on positive externalities and spillover effects of a knowledge economy. Puts a large role for like public investment in research and development, education, and science. And we can consider where international development is useful for explaining change in regional economies. It doesn't really apply when we consider things like trade. Regions within a nation state have no restrictions on trade. They also use the same monetary system. There's no restrictions on immigration or access to labour. There's not so many differences in cultural and societal norms. There's no barriers to market access. It's a bit of a grey area in terms of things like assuming levels of income, saving, spending, and consumption are the same in every region in a nation state. It just doesn't happen. And some regions have transition problems. They have difficulty moving through stages of growth. They're often, knocked backwards through deindustrialization or international competition. And regions and cities can move in and out of the top performers club. There's also this idea that, prices converge nationally, and maybe there are some regions which are dependent on more or core successful regions in the same country. But we could say it does apply in terms of this idea that all regions and countries are at different levels and stages of development. They have different factor endowments, different levels of specialization. That human capital and capability is an important part of the development process. They've got different physical assets and infrastructure, and they engage in nonlinear growth. So much of economics is space blind, has trouble explaining the following: why regional and city economies are specialized beyond their factor endowments, such as natural resources, and why a place is sticky. Why do we see industries and skilled workers cluster geographically, and why do we see value chains like cohere in small geographic areas? And so, again, why is there core and periphery regions? How come there's high-performing regions and then laggards within the same nation state? And why is the distribution of technology and knowledge so different within a nation state? And why do costs vary so much within a nation state? So in response to this, there's been a development of regional and urban economics. And this idea that, some industrial specialisms have higher productivity and skills, that there's sorting takes place. So, eventually becomes expensive to locate in one region, and firms and workers move to a cheaper region. And urban economics, takes this sorting process further. and then predicts that prices and wages converge, but and that capital and labour will move to where it's cheaper to operate. But this is rarely seen in real life. That capital and labour substitution, happens over a very long period and is not immediate. And so there's also this idea that high cost regions will have the costs will increase, and real incomes in reality are not that high. A process of people leaving, but there's not much evidence to support this when you look at the actual statistics of, say, the top cities in the US who've maintained their wage and wealth premium. So there's something called the New Economic Geography was devised as a new theoretical foundations to try and explain geographical variation in economic performance. With things like cluster specialization, agglomeration economies, and that's about, you have a very dense network of firms and individuals and skills and actors in a value chain, and this allows you to specialize and drive up productivity. And that factor endowments are fixed, and capital, labor, and knowledge have mobility, but it's very gradual. And then we have this idea of spillovers from wages, skills, and technology. There's also been development of institutional theory that laws, governments, routines, and social practices can help define the development path of a region or a city, and define the industry and company structures and practices. Some of them become more successful than in other regions. And so this has been termed the new regionalist approach. And there's also an idea of robust actors or individuals who can kind of punch above their weight and really help transform a region or a city. In sum, to understand regional economic problems and solutions, some economic knowledge helps a lot. It's really a toolkit for understanding. I think it could be quite confusing to a newcomer to deal with all those economic concepts, but I do think international development economics does a good job of really structuring the thinking, and I think more importantly, applies rigorous evidence and analysis to the theories to see if they stand up in real life. And economic theories, concepts, and evidence, they're a toolkit really for analysing regions and localities and their performance and understanding solutions. You can read a kind of very structured approach to analyzing the differences in performance between two regions. That's San Francisco and Silicon Valley and Los Angeles in this excellent book. I highly recommend it. I think as well, just to remember, we have all these different theories and tools at our fingertips, and all these different experts you can engage in. It's mostly about being curious and asking the right questions about your region or your city. You're asking, why don't we have such a big tech sector as other cities, for example, despite having good universities? That's a good question, and these tools can help you answer that. In the introduction, I mentioned that it's a mission of mine to help build great economic development organizations. In most of the videos and podcasts, I will reflect on this using what I call a scale of practice. This is based on my 30 years of professional experience working with local, city, and regional economic development organizations and teams. And what I mean by this is it's the A, B, C, D of practice. Are you amateur, basic, competent, or dynamic? I'm going to go straight to dynamic. A dynamic economic development organization, they'll have a chief economist or a team of economists. Economists do analysis. They're expert at taking the data, understanding the causal connections, explaining change, and also understanding how you may be able to offer solutions or policies or delivery. They're different to statisticians who more or less process data and present it in a very descriptive way. So great economic development organizations have this expert set of researchers and economists and policy experts at the heart of the organization, and they work well with colleagues. and they work well with stakeholders, and they're able to communicate these concepts and implications to non-economists and non-technical people. They often also in touch with global experts on various subjects, and they keep tabs on how theories and knowledge develop. They're constantly learning and building and updating their knowledge base. So just to recap what we've discussed in this video, the Redux version of episode 2, why economic development, what are the main economic theories, these orthodox economic theories, when they fall down for regions and cities, where do we go from there? How do you use theory and evidence? Why curiosity and asking the right questions is important. And then again, a bit about what does a great economic development organization look like. Hey, so thanks for listening. Just to let you know that this is part of a series of videos and podcasts about local economic development. There are 16 episodes ranging from topics such as the principles of economic development to the UK's history of local and regional economic development policies and initiatives. And also there's episodes on the main economic development functions such as strategy, enterprise, inward investment, innovation, and labour markets. So these videos will be released over the next few months, and you'll have reminders if you sign up for the mailing list. And you can find details on the YouTube site and website links below. Thank you. So please remember to give the videos a like if you think they're useful and you think other people would benefit from them.